Claudia, I'd like to start with you. A lot of Trump administration folks suddenly seem to be talking to the committee, or at least in talks to appear before the committee. What is your sense, based on your reporting, why all of this is happening now?
Well, we talked to Chairman Benny Thompson today, who returned to Capitol Hill. He told reporters he's pleased with this progress in terms of this widening net of ex-Trump cabinet officials who are coming in, Trump officials who are coming in to talk to the committee. As you mentioned, negotiations are ongoing, he said, with Pompeo, so that's somebody else they hope to see in the near future. In addition to that interview today with Mick Mulvaney, it looked like it was going to stretch for several hours. And he said this is all part of the committee's plan. They're still in business, even though they've wrapped up those summer hearings, to continue to investigate what happened before the January 6th attack, what built up to that day as far as the Trump administration was involved. And that report they want to issue later this year, basically giving a more comprehensive picture of what those forces were and exactly what role then President Trump played in it.
Joyce, help us understand, and there's been some reporting to suggest the focus of these conversations has to do with the 25th Amendment. Help us understand from your legal perspective, why would the committee be interested in conversations within the Trump cabinet or the Trump administration around the 25th Amendment, which is the amendment used to remove a sitting president from office by the cabinet?
So the committee, of course, is trying its case to the jury of public opinion. And the logical next step after having put on full display Trump's failure to act for the 187 minutes while the Capitol was being overrun would be to follow that up with the sense of how Trump's own people, how his own cabinet viewed his inaction. The fact that they considered invoking the 25th Amendment would be a remarkable revelation because so many of them stood by him. Unlike Mick Mulvaney, not very many people resigned at that level in the wake of January 6th. We saw a few, like Cabinet Secretary Elaine Chao, depart, but most of them stayed on board. So hearing testimony about their reactions and their conversations could be very powerful as one of the final steps of putting the nail in the coffin, so to speak, of the former president's unfitness to serve in the future, if you're the congressional committee trying your case to the jury of public opinion.
To the jury of public opinion, which is extremely important, would it also be of interest to the Department of Justice if they wanted to learn anything more about what the committee uncovers around these conversations involving the 25th Amendment?
You know, at this point, everything is of interest to the Justice Department. They're clearly investigating conduct. They're not targeting individuals, but rather they're trying to get a handle on what crimes could have possibly been committed in connection with January 6th. And so, for instance, when we talk about getting testimony from former Secretary Pompeo, there's been reporting that he was among the people who were very concerned about the fact that Trump was making a series of appointments at the Defense Department after he had lost the election, replacing, for instance, that acting secretary and other people with Trump loyalists. So if I'm sitting at DOD, I'm very interested in trying to figure out what sort of plans the former president had for the Defense Department, whether he intended to have Guard troops or other troops involved in some capacity to support him on January 6th. These are sort of known unknowns at this point. They're possibilities. It's speculative. DOJ's job is to get to the heart of it. It's important for them, I suspect, as well as the committee, to get testimony from these witnesses.
Katty, let's talk about Mick Mulvaney for a moment and the fact that he testified today. He wasn't in the inner circle of the Trump administration on January the 6th. He was at one point when he was the acting chief of staff, certainly understood the orbit of the Trump world. But what does he bring to the committee with whatever he may have known at the time of January the 6th? And as we played there in that clip, his resignation.
Yeah, he had already served as envoy to Ireland, and then, of course, he stepped down after the events of January the 6th, as we played there. But one of the things that he did do, which might be of interest to the committee, is tweet about Cassidy Hutchinson. And in some extent, he served as a character witness to her. He came out publicly immediately after Cassidy Hutchinson had testified to say that anyone who knows her would know that she was not lying. So in some senses, he may be able to corroborate some of what she heard, or at least corroborate her as a reliable witness. But he would be able to back up as well what members of the cabinet, members of the inner circle in the White House had been thinking about the president, mostly prior to his time when he left as acting chief of staff, and then went off to serve as the special secretary for Ireland. But he would still have a knowledge of what other members of the cabinet were saying.